Chelsea Manning returned to prison. She was remanded into federal custody for refusing to testify for a grand jury. And I'm reading from Sparrow Media. They said, quote, in addition to being held in confinement for the duration of the grand jury investigation or until she, quote, purges her contempt and testifies, the district court judge Anthony Trenga ordered Chelsea to be fined $500 every day she is in custody after 30 days and $1,000 every day she is in custody after 60 days. And while coercive financial penalties are commonly assessed against corporate witnesses, which cannot be jailed for contempt, it is less usual to see them used against a human witness. In a sealed hearing, Anthony Trenga heard arguments that this post-indictment subpoena should be quashed as an impermissible effort to compel Chelsea to participate in trial preparation, which is beyond the scope of the grand jury's investigation. I believe what Chelsea Manning's lawyers were arguing there was that, the state is not just trying to investigate, they're actually trying to get pre-trial preparation from Chelsea Manning's response in this grand jury testimony that they want from her. And I think that it's a huge shame that Anthony Trang did not really listen to that argument, but that he's imposed this fine as well.
The fine is itself extraordinary because, when we're talking about $500 a day after 30 days, that's a lot of money. And then $1,000 a day after 60 days. That's going to add up very quickly. And so you're talking about, if let's say it goes on for about a year, which it's quite likely to, that's already $500,000 that she's going to be in arrears. And what happens then? Right. If she doesn't have $500,000, who has $500,000? What's the government going to do? Are they going to imprison her until she pays this, or are they just going to impose some kind of a penalty on her subsequent earnings? How much is she earning? She's not somebody who generates a huge income. So how is she going to pay off this kind of this extraordinary sum of money? This is grotesque to apply this kind of pressure against anyone. And what's clear from all of this is that this is all about the government's pursuit of Julian Assange, because that's what they want from Chelsea Manning. They've already got all the information they want out of her. She's already been court-martialed. She's given any amount of testimony in court and with investigators and so on. So why are they so anxious now to have her testify? And this is clearly because they're building this case against Julian Assange, which just goes to show that clearly that this nonsense that they came up with in order to extradite Julian Assange simply inadequate. And they're going to have to come up with something else, because this is so flimsy that even in the friendly British courts, evidently the Americans have been told your chances of success are really very limited, because as things stand, they probably can't find a single British judge who's going to sign off on it. It's so flimsy that they don't even on this little thing, the smallest element of it, which is that there was somehow collusion between Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. They don't have any direct evidence of it, because all this is they have these messages, but they have no real proof that the person communicating with the Chelsea Manning was actually Julian Assange. So they can't even establish that.
Absolutely.
So if you're not even able to provide the minimum, then your case is pretty flimsy. So obviously, then they're trying desperately to come up with something in order to present to the British courts. So this is what it's really all about.
Definitely. And I think that obviously, that imposition of this financial fine, it really shows the way in which they've kind of assessed Chelsea Manning as someone who will stick to her principles and is willing to stay imprisoned, without being convicted of any crime for an undetermined amount of time. And so that's why they're trying to go at this from a different angle, where it's not just herself as her own lifetime being spent in a prison, but also her financially, being punished. And I think that, and we really see this clash in that statement by her, saying that she would rather, starve to death than testify. So I think that, Chelsea, as noted by a lot of people in the last, few days and hours since she's been re-imprisoned, have really been flawed by the amount of courage that she has to keep re-entering this situation, on her principles. It's absolutely awe-inspiring. What do you think, we can expect to generally see moving forward? Do you think that they'll impose additional fines if she doesn't relent? I mean, what do you see happening in the near future?
Well, it's a very good question, because I wondered about that myself, because it doesn't look to me like she's going to cave. I mean, it was clear from her kind of news conference yesterday that she has no intention of caving. She knows what's ahead of her. She says, yeah, I'm going to jail. I've already been in prison for 7 years, so I'm not really afraid of jail. I mean, it's. I mean, you're already saying, you're imposing torture on her, which again I find quite extraordinary, because this seems so disproportionate. I mean, this is disproportionate because we're talking about somebody who has already been convicted in the court martial. Her sentence has already been commuted by the president, and now she's being tortured again on the same charges. Now, the Convention Against Torture is one of the few international covenants that the U.S. has actually signed and ratified. I mean, probably it regrets having done so, but it's one of the few it's done. I mean, there haven't been too many international covenants. I mean, not since the 1949 Geneva Convention that the U.S. has actually ratified any of these international covenants. But the Covenant on Torture, it did. This seems to me torture. I mean, if somebody says, was already served a sentence and said that I'm not going to give testimony, I've already given everything I have, and then they're going to just keep her in prison until what? Until she just breaks? That just seems torture. I mean, there's just no other way to do it. I mean, you are inflicting pain against somebody in order to compel essentially false testimony. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're trying to compel false testimony from her. Clearly, to me, it's just it's a violation of torture, and much the same way with Julian. You're using the coercive powers of the state in order to compel testimony from someone, the very thing that we're not supposed to be engaged in. It's going back to what we were saying at the start. That's why the Swedish case seems to be, now the more likely route, because this American thing just isn't going anywhere. I mean, seems to be the best they've got is to torture Manning. The other guy, the Vault 7 guy, we don't seem to be hearing much about him. I mean, I'm sure they're torturing him in order to compel him to give testimony against Julian in order to, for this extradition request. But he doesn't seem like he's caving because we haven't heard anything about anything coming on that end either. So that's why the U.S. is focusing so much on Chelsea Manning. The case is going nowhere. I mean, that's the amazing thing. They've had all these years to prepare, and they haven't been able to come up with anything.
But what I do know, and I'm aware of, is that once they do file that, whether it's on June 14th or whether they get an extension, eventually, when they do actually file it, they will have to show all of the charges. They won't be able to add anything on after that. And I think that would be, if they are forced to do that on June 14th, that would be why they're so desperate with Manning. But it also, in addition to that, even after they file and reveal all the charges, it definitely would be possible to continue that grand jury, as Chelsea Manning said it was, in order to basically prepare their argument, in order to sort of craft a narrative that they could then use in the courtroom, which, as Chelsea Manning's legal counsel said, is completely illegal. It's not allowed. Yeah.
But of course, once the U.S. has got Julian Assange in his hands, then I think they're going to hit him with all sorts of charges and all sorts of stuff that didn't come up in the extradition request. And while the British may protest and say, hey, you never told us in your extradition request that you were going to charge him with that, since when has the U.S. ever worried about keeping its promises or adhering to international law? So that's not going to, they don't care that the British might be upset about this. But their problem at this stage is to get their hands on him. That's what they've got to do. They've got to come up with something in order to persuade the British courts, because at the moment they don't have anything to persuade the British courts. So that's why maybe they're thinking that Sweden is our best route
Definitely. And I think, Sweden does have a history of extraditing, I believe, every single extradition that to the US that has been requested by the US from Sweden has been approved by Sweden thus far, to my knowledge. And so I think it's also really important to focus on the UK Home Secretary, because it really is, it echoes Assange's statement too. The UK must resist this from the Trump administration. Well, the UK Home Secretary is the one that has to consent to Assange being extradited onward from from Sweden to the US. So I think that is where people need to be sending letters. We need to be highlighting that and make sure that people are aware that that forward extradition to the United States from Sweden cannot happen unless the UK Home Secretary allows it to happen. So that is the real mechanism that could, I think, prevent this.